Professor Alford, welcome to another edition of Survival of the Fittest, Unite and Conquer. We're happy to have you aboard. We're honored and excited for another episode and a special series tonight especially. Tell us a little bit about where you're from.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for the honor of being asked to participate in such a monumental project. I think it's wonderful, so thank you. I was born in Shreveport, Louisiana. Currently, I live in Orlando, Florida. I'm a law professor at Florida A&M College of Law and an adjunct professor of medicine at UCF, University of Central Florida College of Medicine.
Thank you. Now, of all your experiences thus far, what would you say is your favorite?
Experiences in the terms of publications, I would say that I haven't written my favorite. I want to always believe that I have something more to give, but in terms of the most impactful to date, I do believe maybe the article that I published in Georgetown Journal of Gender and Law. It is entitled Exploring the Black Woman's Sphere and the Anti-Lynching Crusade of the Early 20th Century. And during this anti-lynching crusade, there was massive lynchings going on, more so in the South.
And around what time period was that?
We're looking at early 20th century, 1896. We have Ida B. Wells being very vigilant as a Black woman about the need for federal anti-lynching legislation, which never came to pass. And my research, and I did this particular article through the congressional records, and to read the types of things that were going on, the atrocious, horrific lynchings that came to pass in states, and to suggest that the federal government turned its eye and said we cannot pass this legislation was something I wanted to write about, and the work that had been done. I say that this particular article was important. It was written in 2002, but in 2005, the then Senator Mary Landrieu contacted me after reading the article and appointed me to a steering committee because there was a Senate Resolution 39 which posed a formal apology for not passing legislation. So I thought that that was very impactful in the sense to know that scholarship can have historical girdings and also have a present day impact, because we need to deal with that American nightmare. That's what that lynching period was called, an American nightmare. And we may speak later, but we are currently in a global nightmare.
You mentioned the idea of lynching. Now, I understand that you are a poet, a woman of strong syllogism and use of words. When we talk about lynching, can we break that down in modern day terms? What does that look like? What types of things have African American women, women of African descent, been exposed to?
In this particular article, excellent question. In this particular article, lynching as a whole was historically a sense of protecting the purity of womanhood, white womanhood, against rape. So the Black men were traditionally thought to be lynched. But what I expose in this particular article is that families were lynched, women were lynched. And the article, the particular specific instance that when I read it, and I believe that if this particular instance didn't turn the minds and hearts of those legislators, nothing would impact this federal legislation. But it is the story of Mary Turner. And Congressman referenced this in his congressional debate in Georgia, 1908. A mob of white men, unable to locate an African-American man suspected of murder of a white farmer, lynched 8 innocent men: Will Head, Chaim Riley, Will Thompson, Hayes Turner, and 4 unidentified African Americans. Mary Turner, a pregnant woman, was also lynched for loudly proclaiming the innocence of her husband, Hayes Turner. She was hung by her feet, gasoline was thrown on her clothing, and she was set on fire. Her body was cut open, and after her infant fell to the ground with a little cry, the child was crushed to death by the heel of one of the white men present. The mother's body was then riddled with bullets. And this was a part of the congressional record to try to convince the congressman that we need federal legislation to stop lynching. And this was reported by the NAACP. It didn't happen. The thing that I think is impactful about scholarship is the ability for individuals to read it and do something with it. And in this instance, then Senator Mary Landrieu read this article amongst other information that she was exposed to and decided to draft a resolution apologizing for the lynching, for failure to impose anti-lynching legislation. And I think that's important because this period of time was chaotic. It was one in which society, there were mob lynchings, and society was sending postcards through U.S. mail of people being burned and lynched. But something had to happen within the human heart to stop the massive lynchings. The characterization of this period of mob lynching as an American nightmare is something that we currently need to look to, because I believe we're experiencing a global nightmare. And I think history will help us to say, and what did we do then? And to look at where we are right now, the way that I think my scholarship is impactful is to suggest that we have to see each other. We have to acknowledge differences, culture, and we have to rise to the occasion of respecting humanity. We have to rise to the occasion of respecting personhood. And that, I could say in a nutshell, is the impetus for the scholarship that I engage in, because as I engage in it in the legal education realm and medical education realm.
Now, what does that look like, the intersectionality of the legal realm and the medical realm? Why is it important to focus on that intersectionality, and where does the power lie within the meeting of those two fields?
Okay, that's where my childhood aspirations come in. I've always wanted to be an attorney. I've always wanted to be an advocate because I love to talk. But secretly, I wanted to be a poet. I wanted to be Maya Angelou. I'm whispering because it's a secret, but it's not a secret because through poetry and storytelling, I've been able to share alternate realities in both the legal profession and the medical profession. So, medical education has an accreditation standard for cultural competency, okay? Cultural competency being able to acknowledge that within the profession of medicine, healthcare disparities exist. How are professionals being trained to adopt an attitude of understanding, empathy, and the like? This is a accreditation standard for medical education curriculum. My poetry and my inclination to understand history and her stories helped me to suggest that in order for medical schools to meet their cultural competency standard, that they needed to look at what has happened historically as it relates to women's bodies and health. So for instance, I've written articles on the enslaved women whose names are Anarcha, Bestsey, and Lucy. These three women's bodies were used during enslavement by Dr. J. Marion Sims. Dr. J. Marion Sims is heralded as the father of U.S. gynecology. I was inclined to suggest that if medical doctors in training were going to learn about gynecology and Dr. J. Marion Sims, that they also needed to learn about the alternate reality of how enslavement was beyond chattel labor, that it also provided a venue for medical advancements because those bodies were property. So the linkage between critical race theory and critical race feminist theory, I would suggest, focuses the attention on the women and how race and law and gender intersects and how it intersected historically and how that framing can allow how that framing can advance a present day encounter. For instance, with the gynecology and the knowing the development of gynecology and knowing that it was done on the bodies and of human experimentation of these women, enslaved women, and being able to suggest that that there was a denial of personhood, and we need not repeat that denial of personhood in our current healthcare delivery. So that's the connection for a historical narrative, a narrative that focuses on the unique and particularized experiences of that woman, and how exposing that within the educational realm, within curriculum, that a medical doctor in training can then see the person that's before them in their present day encounters. So that is wondering enslavement of a critical narrative that I speak to in my writings. And also, it was the impetus of, I'm the senior editor of an encyclopedia, Enslaved Women in America. And in this particular book, A through Z, under medical experimentation and surgery, I've written the excerpt that tells the story of Anarcha, Bestsey and Lucy, and the impact on the institution of enslavement. So it configures how the institution of slavery differed from men and women and the impact.
How did you end up in the field you're in, and how did you currently get your start?
I think the field that I'm in really found me. I was interested in utilizing critical race history stories, narrative storytelling, because I'm interested in poetry. And then I discovered that medical education had a accreditation standard for cultural competency. So I was able to make the link between how can what is important to me be made important to others. If there is a policy consideration, then I needed to be able to articulate my interest in such a way that it enhanced the profession. With that being said, as a professor must engage in TSS. My life is filled with mnemonic devices. TSS, teaching, scholarship, and service. Teaching means talking, advocating, explaining existing theories and paradigms. Scholarship means writing, creating new paradigms, and expanding on the current discourse. And for me, that means providing an alternate reality. There is a reality, but theoretical framework allows you to provide an alternate reality that may not have been thought of. And with that exposure, it brings forth understanding. So with my theoretical framework, the essence of my goal is to put it into practical application. And since medical education curriculum needs that cultural competency, then that is the way that I see myself doing that. Service. Service to me means participation in the development and improvement of the legal profession by presenting on panels, by presenting on workshops. It also means engaging with students, faculty, alum, and it means community service.
Through your studies, what would you say is the most powerful realization or the most impactful takeaway that you've experienced so far?
The most powerful takeaway that I can share is to do your time. You have to put the time in. And if an idea or a paradigm or a thought is given to you, then you have to follow through it. You have to believe in your idea. In 2012, I served as the inaugural University of New Mexico Diversity Visiting Scholar. In 2013, I served as Tuskegee's residential research scholar for the National Bioethics Center. During that time, I spoke about the importance of ignored stories in healthcare, legal systems. Today, in 2016, I've been placed in position to integrate those former ignored stories or marginalized stories in medical education curriculum. So I say that it may not happen overnight where people understand why you are involved in a particular theoretical framework. But once you continue to study, to do the research, and to try to make it understandable to the entities that you're trying to impact, then I believe it comes together, it connects. So if I had to say, what's my realization? My realization is believe in your idea. Believe in your idea, hone your skills, your research skills. And for me, it was very important to have practical application. I did not want to write on just and leave it in these journals and nice books. I want it to have practical application.
Do you have a mentor? Who were some of the most significant players throughout your life that provided the most support or insight for you?
My first mentor is a very wise woman. She had 3 initials behind her name. Those initials were GMA, Grandma. My grandmother bestowed upon me a sense of paying it forward. Before I left for college, I told you I was from Louisiana, so we have porches in Louisiana. Above a porch being above the steps and above the, so that you can walk up in case of flooding. But as I sat on the porch with my grandmother before I left for college, she looked at me very seriously and she said, "Don't let your name beat you back home." And she smiled and said, "Unless it's good." I operate from that vein. My grandmother passed in 2008 at 92 years old. Don't let your name beat you back home unless it's good. We live in a generation that your name beats you back home during the event, if videotaped. So that may not apply for you all right now, but the idea that your action goes before you, and that's how you pay it forward. So as my number one mentor was my grandmother, my childhood, my mother and father, Carrie Floyd Alford, and a community leader, Mrs. Lily J. Bradford, was the community leader for a junior sorority. And she recognized that I had a talent in poetry, whereas it was a contest, and I had relegated talent to singing and dancing. And she asked, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I don't sing and I don't dance." She said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Poetry." She said, "Let me hear it." And I did it. And I made second place in this competition. And I recognized that poetry was a talent. And it stayed with me. And I think that as a mentor, when people, mentors find you. And so in college, the president of Southern University of Baton Rouge, the first female president, Dr. Dolores Richard Spikes, was my mentor. She gave me an opportunity to be a student worker. Law school, Vice Chancellor Russell Jones, he was my moot court advisor. I think that's the impact law professors have on the lives of individuals when they do the time, that's service. My legal research and writing professor, I often say, but for her, Evelyn Wilson, I would not be here. Con law professor L. Darnell Whedon, currently he's at Thurgood Marshall Law School. After law school, years later, I decided to go to pursue a master's of law at Georgetown University Law Center. Professor Emma Coleman Jordan was my thesis supervisor and offered sage advice during my journey. My entry into the legal academy teaching law came through service. George Washington University Dean was very active with BALSA, gave me an opportunity to participate in the development of the second National People of Color Legal Scholarship Conference. So I got a chance to meet people and have lasting relationships with people who were already law professors through service. And that was Dean Alfreda Robinson. Scholarly trajectory, when I tried to find my voice, I read other law review articles, and Professor Adrian Wing started out a law review article with a poem. And I said, I can do that. Critical race feminist theory we owe to Professor Adrian Wing. Professor Margaret Montoya, University of Mexico, planted a seed for integrating critical race theory into medical education. And over time, I've had contact with her. And when she retired, she wrote in one of my books, she was passing the baton to me to strike with the energy to continue the work. If that's not, don't let your name beat you back home unless it's good, I don't know what it is. So now currently, in terms of education, I went to a conference and talked to someone about my goal of integrating critical race theory into medical education curriculum. The person heard me and showed up as a mentor and said, you know what, perhaps you should try our program at the Medical College of Wisconsin. You can get a certificate in clinical bioethics. I had not thought about it, but that's what a mentor does. A mentor shows up when you need it at that time and connects the gaps. So currently I'm doing that.
Speaking to law students who have yet to start their careers, is there something that you wish you'd known when you first got started?
Yes. I often tell my students to trust the process. Trust the process. What do I mean? It is important that you know your specific learning style. Be it a visual learner that you need graphs, you need to see it written down, you need charts. Be it an auditory learner, you need to hear it, you need discussion tapes, you need to talk it out with someone, you do well in groups. Be it tactile or kinesthetic learner, you need to experience it. You need to do the role playing of the people involved in the brief that you have to do. You need to know that specific learning style and be able to adapt it to the professor's teaching style. The professor is not going to change his or her style. You have to adapt what it is that you know about yourself in order to be successful and to gain mastery of the subject matter. What I do know is that you will receive CCC, another mnemonic device. You will receive context, you will receive concepts, and you will receive critical analysis. You'll receive the context. You're going to be provided assigned reading materials. And this can be applied in law school and with potential employers. You're going to be given an assignment. Concepts. You will have to learn. You will have to engage. What do these concepts really mean to me in order to have, in the law school environment, mastery of the subject, and as to an employer, the answer. What is the answer? And critical analysis. What I love about teaching is the classroom environment provides such an opportunity for critical analysis to expand your frame of reference. I tell students, you're not the same person who read the newspaper before law school who's reading the newspaper now. And we don't want you to be. You should expand your knowledge. That critical analysis is so important because you're going to have to listen deeply to what your professor needs and what your potential employer needs, or what your existing employer needs. So the 3 C's, context, concept, and critical analysis. And know, when you trust the process, that you're fit for the task. Know that. You have to walk in knowing that. In terms of the legal academy or law school, you have been selected You've earned your seat. Now keep your seat. If you receive a legal job, you've earned your job. Now keep your job by doing your work. As I stated earlier, do the time, and then the process will work itself out.
Now, of all the organizations you've had the opportunity to work with internationally and domestically, which would you say bring the most heartwarming experiences to you, or have been the most provocative or enlightening so far?
I would have to say through service, the National Bar Association has provided me with an opportunity via the Law Professors Division to bring my theoretical framework of critical race theory, cultural competency, speaking about implicit racial biases, to a practical application by virtue of continuing legal education. So the Law Professors Division of the National Bar Association, through the mentor that has mentored me earlier, has said, let's do what we do for judges, practicing attorneys, and legal professionals under the auspice of continuing legal education. So it gives me great satisfaction to know that I can move from the classroom and provide this current knowledge that law students are getting to people who are practicing in the area as they venture and seek continuing legal education.
Where have you been across the globe with your studies and your lectures and your material?
I've been some places. Let's see. I've been to South Africa. I've been to West Africa. I've been to London. I've been to Cuba. Most recently to Cuba with the National Bar Association. And to think about, for me, the international impact of my work is so critical because it helps me to expand the thought of discussing race and races. What I mean by that is that in the United States, we generally are relegated to this binary paradigm of black-white, most significantly due to U.S. enslavement. But throughout the diaspora, throughout the world, race and racism exist, and it's not through this binary paradigm. It's because race is socially constructed. So once we unpack the fact that beyond seeing the person that's placed in a box that's socially constructed, because today you will have some mishaps when you try to socially construct individuals because people don't look like who you think they should look like or who they're supposed to look like, or where they've been trained. So to impose upon these biases and stereotypes and acts of discrimination internationally, I think I'm in a place to be able to acknowledge that and to be able to share that with others. So that international impact broadens the scope of discussion of what it means for race and races. And it also comes to a commonality of disparate treatment because or based upon difference. And I think that's what the international forefront has allowed me to do. Most recently in Cuba, I was able to suggest that critical race feminist bioethics being looking at the rightness or wrongness of ethics in medical care and healthcare delivery, how that needs to be integrated in both the domestic curriculum for medical school and international medical schools. The story or the narrative that I speak to is the U.S. Public Health Service syphilis study at Tuskegee. So utilizing that occurrence from 1932, 1972, and the impact of those men who were involved in a study without their consent. Through a critical race feminist lens, I ask the question, and what about the women? What about the women who were directly impacted by this sexually transmitted disease? And this is going to be the impetus for a book that I have forthcoming called The Untold Story of the Tuskegee Women, the U.S. Public Health Service Syphilis Study at Tuskegee. Because what I'm suggesting is that through critical race feminist lens, we can look at and provide an alternate reality to a historical event that we focused on totally on the men, to broaden it to, and what about the women and children who were impacted? And how is that important to medical doctors in training? I've been able to integrate that historical narrative to an ethics course in medical school, in which those medical doctors in training were learning about Tuskegee, but they were also provided an alternate reality of, and what about the women or children? So now what does that mean for current day doctor-patient encounters? That means that if a student throughout his curriculum is exposed to not only that Tuskegee occurred, and that there's an alternate reality that it also impacted women and children, then during the current encounter between the doctor and patient, that doctor is forced to see beyond the patient. That doctor is being forced to act from a patient-centered approach. The patient is beyond what is before you now. And what I'm trying to suggest in my scholarship, from theory to practical application, is that we can do that through training. And cultural competent lawyers will have the same impact. What impacts this individual client to run if the police says stop? What historical bearings, what understanding does that individual have for compliance? How does an attorney convey what was in the mind of his client without being culturally competent and able to express that?
In closing, what is your final call to action for the next generation of legal practitioners?
Well, it's a very big call, but it's a heartfelt call. My call to action is to be the change you look for. You have been bestowed with the honor of a law degree. You have been bestowed with this higher learning. The best way to utilize it is to be the light in the room, to expose your lived experience and share that with decision makers so that they will be more informed as to how to make the best decision. You are in the room for a reason. Use your authentic voice to express what you know. The issue with facing implicit bias is not acknowledging that it exists. It exists. Being able to share your knowledge from a lived experience will help shape legislation. It will help formulate laws. It makes the difference between individuals' interaction with the law, because that's who you are. You sit in the seat that makes the decision that impacts the other people on the other side. Once you acknowledge that, then you act and you walk and you think, and you're not afraid to speak about what is really the issue, what is not being said. You have to make explicit the implicit.